There are halls built for power, and halls built to remind you who has it. The hall of lineage of the one clan was built for the second purpose. Every stone placed to say the same thing. We were here before you, and we will be here after. 200 members of the one clan stood and knelt in silence that morning. Elders whose hands had signed 1,000 documents. Disciples whose ambitions had not yet been shaped into anything useful. Children who did not yet understand what they were watching. They all came, not because they wanted to, because the hall of lineage did not ask. At the center of the floor, a young man knelt alone. He had been brought here to be erased. He knelt the way a stone sits in a river, still, unhurried, present, as though the water moving around him was simply weather. As though he had been waiting for this morning for a very long time. The brush moved. Elder Mao Tan had held that brush for 30 years. 30 years of names added and names removed. He did not think about it. The registry was a record, not a judgment. The brush was a tool, not a weapon. That is what he told himself. That is what he had always told himself. The ink spread. Clan head when Baran watched from his chair without expression. He had made this decision 3 days ago. Announcing it today was simply the administrative conclusion. He had not lost sleep over it. He was not the kind of man who lost sleep over administrative conclusions. His eldest son, Wen Hao, stood beside him. The one clan's strongest young cultivator. A man who had been told that fact so many times it had become the foundation of his personality. He looked at the kneeling figure on the floor the way a man looks at furniture being removed from a room, noting the absence before it has even occurred. Already moving on. Finally, some weeds need pulling before they choke the garden. The laughter was quiet. That was the worst of it. Not loud cruelty, which at least announces itself, but the soft, certain kind. The laughter of people who were confident the object of it could not respond. 200 people sharing a small, mean moment. The kneeling figure at the center of the floor did not move. Not everyone was laughing. At the back of the hall, half hidden behind a support pillar, the clan head's third son watched the proceedings with far more interest than his expression suggested. When Chang had been watching carefully for some time now, he was always watching carefully. The question no one had thought to ask was why. The brush crossed the name for the final time. Elder Mao Tan lifted it. The ink was still wet. And then, for a fraction of a single second, the covered characters pulsed silver. Not the ink. Something beneath the ink. Something the ink could not reach. It lasted less than a breath. Then it was gone, and the registry page sat closed and black and ordinary on its dais. Or appeared to. Across the hall, a 12-year-old boy in inner disciple blue went rigid. He had seen it. He was the only one who had seen it. He was 12 years old, and he did not yet know what he had seen. But he knew it was not nothing. Children are better at that than adults. Adults are too busy deciding what things mean to notice what things are. When Sui rose from the floor, he took his time about it. He brushed the dust from his knees with 2 slow passes of his hand. The hall watched. He did not perform anything for them. He did not perform grief or rage or dignity or defiance. He simply stood up, as though standing up were the most ordinary thing a person could do in this moment. Perhaps for him it was. He looked at Wen Baran first. He looked the way you look at something you have already finished with. Then Wen Hao, whose sneer held, and then almost invisibly fractured. Not broken. Not destroyed, just fractured, the way stone fractures before it falls. Then he looked toward the pillar where Wen Chang stood. For 1/2 second, Wen Sui smiled. It was a small smile, private. It contained 11 years of patience and the specific satisfaction of someone who already knows the ending. He turned and walked toward the hall's enormous double doors. He did not look back. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Behind him on its dais the registry sat closed. And beneath its cover in the ink that had tried to end him a single character continued to pulse faint silver, refusing quietly to die. The outer courtyard did not notice him leave. Disciples drilled with wooden swords in their formations. Leaves crossed the stone in the autumn wind. The one clan's world continued on its axis adjusted for his removal, already forgetting the adjustment had been made. He walked through it all like someone moving through weather. He almost made it to the gate. A small breathless voice caught up to him just short of the iron-bound doors. Cousin Sui. Wait. He stopped walking. He crouched down to meet the boy's eye level. When Lin was 12 years old and furious in the way only children can be. The pure, uncomplicated fury of someone who knows something is wrong and cannot understand why the adults around them do not seem to agree. Listen to me carefully. He looked up at the sky above the compound walls. Gray-blue, autumn cold. Why? Watch the sky, Lin, not the ground. The boy looked up too frowning. He did not understand. Not yet. What does that mean? It means what it says. The boy grabbed his sleeve. When are you coming back? Sui gently pulled the fabric free. He did not lie to the boy. He had never lied to Wen Lin. Promise. Sooner than you think. He turned and walked through the outer gate. The iron-bound gate doors swung shut behind him. Wen Lin stood inside the compound with one hand still slightly extended and the specific grief of someone who has just watched a promise leave without being able to follow it. Wen Sui did not look back. He never looked back at things he was done with. He only looked back at things he intended to return to. He sat on a hillside east of the city as dusk arrived. The valley below him was settling toward night. And between his open palms for the first time in 11 years something moved. Not much. A thread of silver light thin as smoke curling with his breathing. He watched it with the attention of a man who has been waiting for a letter for a very long time and has finally heard the knock at the door. 11 years ago someone had sealed the core. Not the man he had been in his previous life. Not by his own hand. Someone else. Someone who had wanted the Ashen Sovereign's power buried in a child's body. Dormant. Forgotten. Waiting. The seal had held for 11 years. The brushstroke across his name in a clan registry had not been the first attempt to make him disappear. It was simply the most recent. The seal was cracking now. From the inside, the merchant district of Stonegate City moved around him like water around a stone. He walked through it the way he had walked through the clan hall. Present, but unreachable. Visible but not seen. He was reading the city. Its traffic patterns, its commercial rhythms, the faces of people with urgent business and the faces of people pretending to have none. He was looking for a specific kind of face. He found it in a narrow alley between a cloth merchant and a grain storage building. The contact was brief. The contact was always brief. The man in the worn brown coat handed over a small rolled document and said 3 sentences. The first 2 were context. The third sentence changed the shape of everything. The Ashen Bell Sect is moving east. Toward Wen territory. In force and faster than the border scouts anticipated. Wen Sui stood in the alley for 3 seconds. Then he turned and began walking. Not back toward the city. East. The Ashen Bell Sect had not come for the One clan specifically. They had come for what was beneath Wen territory. An ancient ley convergence. A deep formation site. The kind of foundation a major sect could use to extend its reach across an entire region. The One clan was not an obstacle to them. The One clan was simply an inconvenience standing in front of something they wanted. Inconveniences get removed. The main force moved through the mountain pass with the patience of people who already know the outcome. He did not owe the One clan anything. That should be stated clearly. They had taken 11 years from him. They had erased his name. They had laughed. He owed them nothing. He walked east anyway. Some debts are not between people. Some debts are between a person and what they are capable of being. He walked toward Wen territory because the alternative was to be the kind of person who could walk away from it. He had never been that person. Not in this life. Not in the last one. On an empty mountain road under stars he stopped walking. He stood in a wide stance with both hands extended and let the silver energy come. Not the thread from the hillside. More than that now. A visible radiant mass between his palms. Alive. Responsive. Moving with his breath. He was not unleashing it. He was measuring it. Taking inventory of what 11 years of dormancy had left intact. The answer surprised him. Everything was intact. Every last piece of it. He met the Ashen Bell Vanguard before he reached the clan walls. 12 cultivators in ash-gray robes spread across the mountain road in a blocking formation. Professional. Disciplined. Completely certain of the outcome. He stopped walking. He stood in the road with his hands at his sides and looked at them. He was wearing a plain dark coat and he had not slept in 2 days and he looked like exactly what they thought he was. A young man who had ended up in the wrong place at a very inconvenient time. The Vanguard commander assessed him. The assessment took approximately 4 seconds. The commander had been doing this for years. Reading threats. Categorizing civilians. Calculating what required force and what did not. He was very good at it. He looked at the young man in the plain dark coat and he saw not a threat. He filed the assessment. He began to speak. At his hands so faint even he almost missed its silver light had begun to pulse. The commander was not looking at his hands. The silver energy detonated outward in a controlled radial burst. Perfect ring. All 12 cultivators were thrown backward in a clean arc, landing in crouched or stumbled positions across the road. The trees on both sides bent from the shockwave. The stone beneath his feet cracked in a radial pattern outward from where he stood. No one was permanently harmed. He had measured it precisely for that. He stood in exactly the same position he had stood in before. He had not moved. He had barely breathed differently. That was a request. The sect will send your answer to the clan walls. I will meet it there. Dawn arrived with him at the clan's outer walls. He had been walking through the night. Behind him in the mountain pass, partially visible through morning haze, the Ashen Bell main force had begun to advance. Before him the iron-bound gates of the clan that had erased his name 4 days ago. He walked toward the gate as though 4 days ago had not happened and as though the army behind him was simply weather. He was very good at walking toward things. When Lin saw him first, the boy was at his watchtower post performing the routine morning road scan with the dedication of an inner disciple who takes his duties seriously. His eyes swept the approach road. Stopped. His knuckles went white on the railing. He came back. He actually came back. He had never stopped believing it. That did not make it less stunning when the belief turned out to be correct. The outer gates opened for him. Not in welcome, in confusion. There is a particular kind of authority that moves through the world by simply not leaving room for anything else. The guards stepped back. The elder who had come to question him opened his mouth and then closed it again. Wen Sui walked through the gates of the clan that had expelled him as though he owned the road he was walking on. He stood before the assembled clan elders in the receiving hall and told them what was coming. The Ashen Bell Sect. Their numbers. Their likely formation strategy. The 4 days of advance warning the clan no longer had. The 2 days they actually had left. What needed to happen in those 2 days if the clan intended to survive them? The elders stared at him. One of them tried to point out that he had been expelled from the clan. Yes, that is not relevant to the mathematics of what I just described. When Hao arrived last, full cultivation armor, the clear intention of a confrontation. He moved through the corridor toward the receiving hall with the specific momentum of someone who has decided to end a conversation before it starts. In the corridor ahead of him, a pale-faced vanguard scout was speaking rapidly to a guard with hands that had not stopped moving since he arrived. When Hao's stride arrested mid-step, he stood in the corridor. The confrontation he had come for had been replaced by information he did not want but could not pretend he had not received. He stood there for a long moment, then slowly walked toward the receiving hall. At a very different pace, the Ashen Bell Sect arrived at Wen territory on the second morning. They assembled in the valley below the clan walls with the unhurried professionalism of people who have done this before. Their numbers made the clan's outer wall look decorative. The storm that had been building for 2 days had arrived with them, the sky above the valley deep purple and gray. The sect banners moved in the pre-storm wind. The clan's disciples watched from the inner wall and tried to calculate whether they were afraid. Most of them concluded yes. The sect master stood at the head of the formation. His name was rarely spoken in full. The way the names of mountains are rarely spoken in full. You simply referred to the direction. He had built the Ashen Bell Sect over 40 years from a mid-tier regional institution into something that made provincial clans adjust their territories preemptively rather than wait to be asked. He looked at the one clan's walls. He had looked at walls like this many times. He was already thinking about what came after. He was not expecting the figure on the wall. Specifically, he was not expecting a young man in a plain dark coat to be standing at the wall's crest with silver energy blazing along both arms like something very old that had been asleep for a long time and had recently decided to stop. The sect master's eyes, which had not changed their quality in 40 years, changed their quality. He raised one hand. The formation went still. Hold. Not a retreat. A pause for accurate information. He needed accurate information. He looked at the silver energy for a long time. He was a man who had built 40 years of power on never misreading what he was looking at. He was reading what he was looking at now very carefully. The silver energy moved along the young man's arms with the specific quality of something that had not been leashed by cultivation techniques. That was not trained power. That was inherited power. That was a different conversation entirely. He raised the hold signal again. He needed more time. He had not needed more time in a very long time. The first exchange of force was educational for everyone involved. The sect master deployed a mid-tier formation technique. not his full capability, but far beyond what any clan-level cultivator should have been able to answer. The young man on the wall answered it. The approach road below remembered the conversation for weeks afterward. Cracked stone, displaced earth, trees frozen sideways, silver and gray energy dissipating in opposite directions from the point where they had met. On the inner wall, the clan's disciples stopped breathing. They watched from the inner wall. 200 of them. The same 200 who had watched the Registry erasure 4 days ago. And the silence they held now was a different silence from that morning's silence. That morning's silence had been comfortable. The silence of people safe inside an institution. This silence was the silence of people watching the institution's assumptions revise themselves in real time on the approach road. Below, when Lin gripped the wall edge, his knuckles were white again. But this time, unlike the Hall of Lineage, he was not afraid. He was watching something he had always known was coming finally arrive. The Sect Master came himself. He deployed the technique he had used to end 17 confrontations over the course of his career. Void compression. Lethal. Precise. Total. The air distorted around it. The ground shook slightly under its pressure. Wen Sui raised one open palm and the technique stopped. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Stopped. The two forces held each other at the contact point between palm and void energy, neither advancing, the air distorting outward in concentric rings, small stones lifting from the road, the world itself seeming to pause while it worked out what to do with an equation it had never been asked to solve before. The Sect Master breathed hard. This needs to be understood. The Sect Master had not breathed hard in combat in over 30 years. He lowered his hand. He took one step back. It was a deliberate step. Not a stumble. Not a retreat. An acknowledgement. The specific dignified acknowledgement of a man who has spent 40 years being completely right and has just encountered the exception. He took the step. He breathed. He looked at the young man in the plain dark coat. And something in his expression, the specific quality of cold assessment, became something slightly more careful. They stood on the cratered road, and the Sect Master said something that was more dangerous than any technique he had deployed. Ask whoever delivered you to this clan's doorstep 11 years ago. He paused. If you can still find them. He turned and walked back toward his formation. Wen Sui stood on the road for 3 seconds. Then he turned toward the clan walls. Something had changed in his expression. Not from the technique exchange. From the words. The technique had tested his power. The words had tested something else. He walked back toward the gate. He had new questions. He did not yet have the answers. He would find them. The Hall of Lineage was lit with lanterns when he returned to it. The same clan. The same hall. The same floor. He walked the same path from the doors to the dais that he had walked 4 days ago in the opposite direction. The space had not changed. The space had completely changed. He walked toward the dais. No one stopped him. No one said anything at all. He opened the registry. He turned to the final page, where 4 strokes of black ink had attempted to erase 11 years. The page was still pulsing silver beneath the black surface. Still, after 4 days, refusing to accept what the brush had decided. He had known it would be. He had known it from the moment it happened. You cannot erase what is real by writing over it. You can only write over it and wait for the truth beneath to surface again. It always does. He pressed 2 fingers against the page. Silver fire moved from the contact point outward across the parchment. Not explosive. Not destructive. Deliberate and surgical. Moving along the lines of black ink and dissolving them with the patient precision of someone correcting a mistake that was made on purpose. Beneath each dissolved stroke, ancient silver calligraphy surfaced. The characters that had been there before the brush covered them. Brighter now than they had been before. As though the ink, in trying to suppress them, had compressed them into something more luminous. The silver fire spread across the entire page. Every line. Every column. It did not stop at his name. Continued. Because his name was not simply his name. His name in that registry was connected to records older than the One Clan. Older than the registry. Older than the hall. The silver fire wrote what was true. All of it. In a script that predated the One Clan's founding by several centuries. He lifted his hand from the page. The fire continued without him. Self-sustaining. Permanent. Wen Sui. Ashen Sovereign reborn. 11th year of dormancy concluded. Status undeniable. The characters glowed steadily in the light of the lanterns in a hall that had tried to forget them. They did not flicker. They did not fade. They were simply there. As they had always been there. As they would always be there. The registry had been corrected. It would not need to be corrected again. Elder Mao Tan stared at the page with hands that were trembling. Not from age. He had held brushes steadily for 30 years. His hands did not tremble from age. They trembled because 30 years of certainty is a structure. And structures, when something passes through them that they cannot contain, do not always collapse dramatically. Sometimes they simply vibrate, barely, silently, trying to accommodate something they were never designed to hold. He turned to address the hall. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to raise his voice. You erased a name, not a person. There is a difference. Your clan spent 11 years pretending did not exist. He looked at Wen Baran, at Wen Hao, at the assembled disciples, at the elders. He did not look with anger. Anger is for people who are surprised. He was not surprised. He had simply been patient. The registry has been corrected. The record is accurate now. We can proceed. He turned toward the front of the assembled clan where a 12-year-old boy in deep blue robes was doing everything in his power not to cry and failing at it incrementally. I told you to watch the sky, not the ground. When Lin laughed, a short unsteady laugh that was mostly breath and had relief in it and disbelief in it and the particular joy of being 12 years old and having been right when everyone else was wrong. You came back. You actually came back. I told you I would. I do not say things I do not mean. Outside, full darkness had settled over Wen territory. The storm had passed. The approach road was still cracked. The trees on its edges were still bent sideways. But the formation was gone from the valley below. The Ashen Bell Sect had withdrawn. Not retreated. Not defeated. But calculated. The sect master was a patient man. He would recalculate. He would return. In the Hall of Lineage, a registry page glowed silver in the light of low-burning lanterns. One name, burning faint and permanent in the hall that had tried to forget it. The hall that would not forget it again. Miles east of Wen territory, beneath a mountain fortress in a chamber that did not appear on any map that had been made in the last 300 years, the sect master knelt. He had not knelt before anything in a very long time. He knelt before a sealed stone tablet carved in a script that most living scholars could not read. He was breathing normally now. His composure was returned. He spoke to the stone and the dark. He is awake. The dormancy has ended. 11 years. As you said it would. Sooner than the prophecy anticipated. The stone was silent. The dark was not. A second voice answered from deeper in the chamber's shadow. From a place the torchlight had never reached. From a figure that had not moved in a very long time. Then it begins again. The sect master, who had never bowed to anything in 40 years, kept his knee on the stone. The real war has not started yet. It was never about the clan. It was never about the registry. It was never even about him. It is about what he carries. What was placed in him 11 years ago by hands that understood what was coming. And now it is coming. They called him trash. They erased his name. They laughed. He let them. The Ashen Sovereign does not correct people who have made mistakes. He simply waits for the mistakes to correct themselves. The real war has not started yet. Neither has he.